family here. everyone. Thank you for coming. I just wanted to make a reminder announcement to turn off all of our cell phones or make sure they're silent so that they don't go off during the service. We will be starting in a few moments here. Thank you.
We have gathered together to say goodbye to and to honor the memory of Ralph Green, Yitzchak Yechezkel ben Noach ve'Esther, Alav Hashalom, beloved husband of Helene Lopatin Green, and also of the late Linda Green, Zichrona Livracha, beloved father and father-in-law, of Rabbi Yaakov and Elisheva Green, and grandfather to their children, Emuna, Adira, Tani, Kalev, and Liel. Beloved father and father-in-law of Dr. David and Amy Green, and grandfather to their children, Amos, Odelia, Emmanuel, and Boaz. Beloved brother and brother-in-law of Phyllis and Stuart Kay, and uncle to Naomi Lipset and her family. Beloved stepfather of Beth Seidel. Beloved stepfather and father-in-law of Howie and Rochelle Dimmenstein. Beloved stepfather-in-law of Nick Mandelkern and of his late wife Cindy Helene's late daughter. Beloved stepfather and father-in-law of Rabbi Asher and Rachel Lopatin, and of Miriam Lopatin and her late husband Alan Zichrono Livracha. Beloved stepfather and stepfather-in-law of Leah and Jeff Mendelson, and of Craig and Esther Lopatin, Grandpa Ralph, to their respective children. I am joined by my dear teacher, colleague, and friend, Rabbi Gershon Siegel of Congregation Bethel Ateret Israel. Rabbi Siegel and I, my name's Benjamin Samuels, have had the honor of serving as rabbis to the Green family for 30 years now. Rabbi Siegel longer than that, it's our honor to be here to honor Ralph and to support the family. Rabbi Siegel will now come forward and share words of Tehillim.
Thank you, Rabbi Samuels, for your leadership and your guidance and friendship. I'm going to recite first Tehillim of Gimel, Mizmor David and Roy Lo Echzor, Binostesha Yarbitzeni, Menuchos Yinahaleni, Nashi Yishovev Yancheni, B'Maglei Tzedek, Laman Shemo, Gam Ki Elach B'Geit Samoves, Lo Yirok Yatoim Adi, Shiftecho Mishantecho Hem Yinachamuni. Tarach Lefonai Shulchan Neged Sororoi, Dishanta V'Shem and Roshi Kosa Rivaya. Achtov V'Chesed Yirdufu Nikol Yimei Chayai, V'Shachti V'Vei Sadanoi, L'Orach Yamim. This past Erev Shabbos, very, very close to when Shabbos was to begin, Ralph Green, Zichrono Livracha, was taken to the Olam HaEmes, was taken to Shemayim. And that very Shabbos, we read Parshas Bo, in which we are given direction after being redeemed from Mitzrayim, where the focus really that we all take away, and the Torah tells us explicitly, is our mandate to inform and transmit to the next generation. V'higadata levincha bayomahu lemor. Rabbi Sachs points out, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs points out, that Egypt's response to mortality, to the fact that we're all mortal, was to build pyramids. But the Torah told us that our response is different. Our response is to transmit to the next generation and keep alive the Masorah and the story of the Jewish people. That's the Jewish response to the challenge of mortality. As we now are together in grief, mourning the loss of Ralph, we are consoled by the fact that Ralph and his Eishes Chayil, then Eishes Chayil Linda, together were exemplaries of this mitzvah of Yigadat Levincha Bayom Hulemor. I had the pleasure of being a co-Maimonides parent with Ralph and Linda. My son Shmuel was in David's class together with Rabbi Huff, so I had the opportunity to see Ralph and Linda at the time engaged in this mission of Higadat Levincha. They were exceedingly involved parents, especially in making sure that the Masorah was transmitted. I can only imagine the pride and nachas that Ralph had over the past years as he saw that this devotion resulted in both their sons, Rabbi Yaakov and his Eish Yisrael Shev, David and his Eish Yisrael Amy, how they built glorious homes among the Jewish people that carries on this Masorah and carries on the V'higat L'Bin Chavayom HaMor, as well as the great contributions they each make to their communities and to Klal Yisrael. We all know that Rabbi Yaakov Green is now the leader, the head of school of that very school that his parents were so involved with to make sure that their children got this kind of Masorah transmitted. And we also know that David, a PhD in clinical psychology, has brought strength and chizuk to so many, and especially in Eretz Yisrael, as he even now remotely supports families of Chatufim and others that have been impacted by October 7th. This gives a sense of nechama, of consolation, that Ralph's legacy lives on through them and through their families and through the grandchildren that we all see here in front of us today. This is the kind of a legacy that I'm sure brought him much comfort through his past years. Ralph was a caring husband to Linda when she got sick, when she got cancer. I remember seeing, others can speak more directly about this, him pushing the wheelchair to shul on Shabbos. And then Ralph was blessed later on in life to find Helene LePatin, somebody who was also from this community, and how together, both having suffered loss, both having suffered a loss of spouses who died from cancer, found each other and found comfort and strength in each other. And what's quite remarkable, as Rabbi Samuels read through all of the relationships, you would have to sort of need a Venn diagram to sort of, figure out. But what I think it makes a statement is about the way in which the concept of family expanded between the two of them. It makes a statement about all of them, all involved, the LePatin and Green families, how they all connected so much together, how they all referred to Ralph as Grandpa Ralph. Rabbi Usher LePatin is here with us now, and also one that grew up in this community and has been a rabbinic leader at a national and international level for many years. And it's remarkable the kind of love, circle of love that has been expanded, that's represented by certainly by Ralph and Helene, and we ask Rabbi LePatin to come forward to recite some Tillim and to make remarks.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Siegel and Rabbi Samuels. This is a real honor. The mechila I would ask from the Mace is that initially when Helene, my stepmother, married Ralph, we called him Ralph, but Helene told us that he really wanted to be Grandpa Ralph, and that emotionally it was important to him, and he demonstrated that to our kids. And as Rabbi Siegel mentioned, to the closeness that we feel. It's always difficult. I know, David, when you try to explain how we're related, and I feel now there's like a LePatin heading up Maimonides, so that's due to Grandpa Ralph. I also want to say that I could not imagine anyone more caring and concerned for Grandma Helene. Spending time, the amount of eye drops he had to give her so many times. And Helene, God bless her, is not always easy to accept that kind of beautiful care. And I think of the name Yitzchak Yechezkel, Yitzchak, who carried the wood up to Har HaMoriah for the Akedah. He was
an incredible Ralph Yitzchak Yechezkel, incredible person that understood not only obligation, but expanded that, as Rabbi Siegel said. So I'm just so honored to be here and to express my gratitude to Grandpa Ralph. And Tehillim Aleph. Ashrei ha'ish asher lo alach b'atzat rishayim, u'v'derech chata'im lo amad, u'moshav leitzim lo yashav. Ki b'torat Adonai chevtzo, u'v'torato yegeh yomam v'layla. V'haya ke'et shatu al palgei mayim, asher piryo yitem b'ito, ve'alehu lo yibol, v'chol asher yaseh yatzliach. Lochein arishayim kim kamot asher tidfenu ruach. Al ken lo yakumu rishayim ba'mishpat v'chatayim ba'dat tzadikim. Ki yodei Adonai derech tzadikim v'derech rishayim toved. And as David says, Chol asher yaseh yatzliach, may Ralph's legacy, a blessed legacy, be that there's continued hatzlacha for all those that he loved and cared for. And I do have to say that we're grateful that Grandpa Ralph and Helene came to Detroit. They even came to visit us in Detroit, and that's not an easy thing for people to do. And so we're just someone who really, really understood how to care for people, how to connect, and what love really means.
We will hear Divrei Hesped, eulogy from 4 family members, from beloved sons, devoted sons, Rabbi Yaakov Green and Dr. David Green, and then from 2 of the grandchildren, Emmy and Adira. We start with Rav Yaakov.
I want to begin by thanking everyone for being here, and anyone who is remotely watching from afar, thank you as well. Rav Asher, as you were describing, so I hadn't even thought of this really. When you grow up with your dad as Ralph, you don't really necessarily think as often about his name being Yitzchak, but he really did exemplify that name in a lot of ways. Yitzchak was the character, al pi Torah, al pi Kabbalah, of gevura, of strength, and simultaneously tzchok, of humor. So if you ever heard my father tell a joke, there was never any possibility that it wasn't deadpan. So it was only ever this incredibly serious, strength-filled humor that was Dad. And thank you for pointing that out in the moment, Asher. So I'm going to begin by sharing that Chazal really tell us that there are multiple aspects to Hespedim, that there is a goal to elicit emotion, to elicit tears, but also to elicit inspiration, that we learn from the life of our beloved father and friends, and that whether it's through the emotional response of crying or the intellectual response of hearing about their life, there are kind of 2 kivunim, 2 pathways to feeling impacted by listening to Hespedim. So I'm going to begin by talking a little bit about a biography of my father, which I got to piece together in the moments of speaking with our community members and with my brother and with our Rabbanim. So Dad grew up actually in Roxbury for most of his childhood, and at some point his family made the move to Newton. So he began his schooling first at Boys Latin, which later became Boston Latin, and then at Newton High School, which later became Newton North. In high school, he was a radio guy. So that meant, and people who we grew up with knew exactly what that meant. He was very into Morse code and being a ham radio operator. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, but that was really cool. He went from high school to college here in Northeastern. And believe it or not, for those of you who only knew him later in life, he was actually on a pretty prestigious school's track team. So he was an athlete and was pretty fast and had the body of a sprinter back in the day. That doesn't bode well for me. So after college, he went into the National Guard. And in the National Guard, he became a ham radio operator. At first, they actually made him a truck driver, and he didn't love it. So as a truck driver, he had the zchut of jackknifing a truck. And when his bosses said, "What were you thinking?" his response was probably a little more than, "I'm a radio guy." So they made him a radio guy. And after his service in the National Guard, he was actually pre-med. And then realized through the process of going through those steps that he really loved the science, but didn't really love hospitals or sick people. So he actually switched and became a chemist. His first career move was working locally for a large, no longer existent company called Kendall Paper Goods. They made all sorts of products for infants and babies and diapers and everything. We have a story of family lore that we will now impart to you, which is that as a chemist working for Kendall, he had the zchut of being on a small team that actually patented, invented something that we all, I would say, internationally use on a daily basis. His team invented a glue that is more adhesive when warmer and less adhesive when less warm, so that it solved a problem Kendall was dealing with, which was that there was frustration on the consumer when you went to reach for the last ply of the toilet paper roll and it would shred because it was stuck to the roll. But now with this glue, as you would have less and less toilet paper on the roll, you would be able to pull off that last ply quite effectively. So in our family, whenever you're reaching for that toilet paper roll, we say you should think of Grandpa, and so now you all can as well. As a chemist, Dad actually experienced an accident, a lab accident, where he actually got sulfuric acid in his eyes. And his lab partner saved his sight and saved the day by quickly thrusting his head under the faucet, and that probably led to switching his career once again. He left the fields of science and instead went into market research and eventually ended up working for a series of insurance companies locally in Boston. On the family side, he married my mother, Linda, Alei Shalom, at 38. His sister, Phyllis, my cousin Naomi's mother, knew my mother from work. They were both working for the Commonwealth of Social Workers and set them up. And they were pretty quickly in love. My dad, before getting married, had actually been on a pretty impressive personal growth and Jewish learning journey. He grew up, what we were always told when we were younger, as a fairly unobservant conservative Jew. But as we started to pepper him with questions, because my father was not one to really give forth information, it was really only dragged out of him in half sentences. He had always been a member of a conservative shul in Newton, and we asked him what the shul was like, and it was a classic shul where the women sat above and the men sat below, and we asked him, okay, so when you went to shul, how far away was it? And he said he always lived close enough that he could always walk to shul. So I don't know if that exactly qualifies with the exact story of my dad's upbringing as a non-observant traditional conservative Jew. But my father's journey really only began there. At the completion of high school, he went back himself to Hebrew College to take lessons in Ivrit. And when he and my mother met and started their courtship and then eventually were wed, they committed themselves to grow together. My mother grew up much more traditional, and together they made the commitment to send my brother and I to Maimonides. And through Maimonides and our family's growth, my mother briefly taught Ivrit at Maimonides, and my brother and I, for us, that choice, that commitment led to really a lifetime of commitment and meaning that my parents shared with us through their commitment and their life choices. When I was barely bar mitzvahed, Mom got sick. And when that happened, of course, everything changed for the two boys. But really, I can say now, as an adult, married and with my own children, that it was my dad's world that tectonically shifted. He took care of Mom for years. Doctors and therapists, and then relying on our amazing community, which was a new experience for a very quiet and proud and private man, and support groups and the whole 9 yards. His world was my mother and her illness, and that stayed that way for years. And then later, as the rabbis mentioned, my father found love again and companionship again a second time and was remarried. Helene Lopatin pushed him in different ways than my mother had, pushed him to be more social, to be more open to travel, and they began snowboarding and eventually moved full-time to Florida, where we overlapped with them when we lived in Boca. And when Helene started to lose a step, and then a few more, my dad once again was the devoted caregiver. Every day, as you heard Asher describe, was centered on taking care of his wife. In fact, her care over his own. I have many memories of my dad, especially from when I was little. I remember Dad racing, maybe when he was still able to race, with the two of us to see who would win. I don't remember him actually letting us win, so perhaps that's why none of you ever win any games we play. And also helping us up onto the walls around Newton on the walks to Shul and holding our hands, except for those walls that really meanly put like the stones on top where you can't walk on them. There are a couple of corners, you know who I'm talking about. He would teach us to make paper airplanes. He would play with us on Shabbos mornings, which often meant not getting to Shul on time Shabbos morning. Sorry, both of you. And he was always ready to teach and learn a new card game, a new board game. Mom was the one who did the work with us, who read novels for school with us. Dad was there to play games, to teach us casino and cribbage and hearts. As we said, he was a ham radio expert. Whenever we would meet anyone from the ham radio community and they would see his call sign, and if you've never partied with ham radio people, they would always be very impressed because call signs tend to be quite long and my father's is very, very short and succinct, meaning that he has had a call sign for a very long time. I believe it was either my kindergarten birthday party or my first grade birthday party before all of my birthday parties were at Fairway Bowl on Route 1. This birthday party, we all received a little piece of already prefabricated cardboard, a little motor, a little hammer, wires, and a soldering iron, and all of us 5, 6, 7-year-olds made our own little ham radio hammer and learned the first several letters of the Morse code alphabet. It was a really cool, awesome party that made me very popular. But in fairness, it was actually really great. I mean, who gives a 5 or 6-year-old a soldering gun? But he did. My father's love for ham radio was, I would say, in my and my brother's friend groups, famous. We had a 40-foot tower out the side of the house, and if you ever dared accidentally touch the tower or the wires, you would hear about it, and not quietly. Every single Sunday morning, when I would get up to go watch Captain Bob's drawing hour at 6 o'clock in the morning to learn how to draw, my father would have long ago been awake, still on army time from those circadian rhythms in the National Guard, and you would hear from his den the sounds of dots and dashes as he would be having a grand old time every single moment he could with his Morse code. He had actually shared with us at some point, again in drips and drags, the idea that he had bounced his radio signal off of the moon, or that he had traded signals and handles and conversations with King Hussein of Jordan. Other memories surface as well. Later, from when I became a parent, the fact that he, I think, never or almost never quite got your name, Kalev, right. It was Caleb, or I don't know what other, all of them, just all of the various things. He would never quite get to Kalev, but that was at some point endearing and less frustrating. I remember Sunday night dinners in Boca with my dad when we lived there for 2 years together. And I remember especially recently that Dad was always on top of every single birthday and every single anniversary. My dad loved the rules of the game. He was a very literal man. Whether though the rules of the game were for the games of cards or Parcheesi, or always remembering to send a card and a check in time to ensure that the cursed mail system would make sure that it would arrive on time, or knowing exactly the regimen of pills, in what order and what times of day, and making sure a beloved wife was cared for. The rules of the game kept my dad's life ordered just the way he liked it. I received a call the other day from a close friend, my rabbi and a former Boston community leader, Rabbi Ari Solomons, and we spoke briefly about the idea of kavod achron, that while the levaya is a chance to pay what we would colloquially translate as our last respects, the translation does not do justice. While it is a final stage of kavod, it is not the end of showing kavod. The rules of the game simply shift. And now my kavod to you, Dad, must shift as well. My kavod continues by learning to cherish our family the way he did, by making sure we remember every little detail and date, by cherishing the chance of I get to instead of I have to when it comes to taking care of someone, by cherishing the games we get to play instead of we have to play with our children. Dad, I want to thank you for teaching me some lessons along the way, some of them through fights and through arguments, and some of them through laughter and love. Right now, through a lot of them, through tears. I want to ask Mechila of you for much of those lessons, especially in the teenage years that involved more than your or my fair share of fighting. And I want to ask Mechila on behalf of my family and on behalf of our community, if we didn't show you enough proper kavod as the quiet, gentle giant that you were. May you be a Melit Yosher, may you help our community and really all of Klal Yisrael for many years to come, because right now, Klal Yisrael needs it.
We'll now hear from David.
I remember at a certain point in time when I had moved to New York for school and then grad school. I was on a conversation with my dad at some point, and he stopped me, and in his calm, slow way, he said, "You lived in New York too long. You talk too fast." So I'm going to do my best to slow myself down for my dad. 22 years ago, I first stood at this podium. Back then, it was a community tragedy. The two young sons would have to give eulogies for their mother, a close and relatively young friend to so many other people sitting in this hall. Now, standing here with my brother as not so young men, there's a bit of a muted sadness of a man who lived a full, yet still too short life, and of the family he left behind. When my mother died, I felt compelled to speak about how her death affected me and everyone in the room who knew her and loved her and missed her. Now in this room, many of you are here because you know, love, and support me or my brother or our families. And so now I feel compelled to tell you less about me and more about my father. My father was a simple man. He liked simple things, and he had simple tastes. If we were ever in a Chinese restaurant, there was only one thing to order, and it was lemon chicken. He loved salmon. He loved mushrooms. Oddly, he did not love salmon with mushrooms. when Amy and I started dating, there's a kosher vegetarian place in New York. Everything is only vegetables. And we said to my dad, you have to come and try. They make the craziest things out of mushrooms. And we egged him on. He wanted to get lemon chicken, but we said, no, you need to try Mushroom Delight. And he ordered it, and he tried it, and he took a few bites. And we asked him, what do you think, hoping that this would just have made his life. And he looked up and said, too mushroomy. He was a man of simple routine. I can still hear the sounds of my father, like Yaakov said, the beeps and boops and Sunday mornings, but also in my mind, irritatingly every morning, scraping his cereal bowl for breakfast, stomping towards the shower and back, getting ready for work, and knowing that in a few short minutes he would start calling our names and irritatingly waking us up for school. My dad's radio call sign, W1HT, was also his car license plate in Boston and in Florida. It's also our number. If you're old enough to know, Newton was 332. 9148 alphanumerically is W1HT. Later, it became his cell phone number when he moved down to Boca. When my dad first got sick and Howie's wife, Rochelle, went to help with Helene, my dad's phone was broken. And it wasn't actually broken, it was boomer generation broken. So Rochelle put the SIM card back in. And she said, but I can't access the phone, it's locked. Do you know his PIN? And I said, try 9148. Sure enough, it opened it up. When Yaakov and I went down to visit my dad when he was hospitalized, my dad said, you can't get into the apartment. It's got a code. I said, I think I know what the code is for the apartment. Sure enough, 9148 was the way. It seemed that he loved routine and found comfort in his routine. But then his life changed. And my father, who would try to keep his family safe and together, could not. When my mom died, Yaakov and I were worried about what he would do, how he would survive on his own. There aren't any mean streets of Newton, per se, but navigating life would be challenging for a person who clung to routine. But we saw that my dad was resilient. He joined the Ashkama Minyan in Share. He went to the Boston Kollel for classes. He joined the Kiddush group, Prep, hung out with friends, and even experimented in the kitchen. I remember coming home from college once and visiting him, and on the stove was a pot with cut up mushrooms and water. And I asked him, what were you doing? He said, I tried to make mushroom soup. And noticing that he had 2 ingredients, I said, how did it come out? He said it wasn't mushroomy enough. My dad began dating and found himself in relationships. And I began to understand that my father was a man of contradictions. He loved complex classical music. We had records and records of symphonies and concertos, and we would listen to them in the house after making a fire in the fireplace. When I was older, I asked him why he liked such, elevated classical music, and he said, it sounds nice. When I was in college, or after college, I would get into fights with my father about coming to visit us in New York as a young couple. He would complain about the drive in New York is complicated, frustrating, impossible to find parking, and find different ways to decline. And yet, as a 78-year-old man, he flew across the world and stood in a reception area for hours to be the first people to wish us Mazel Tov as our family crossed out immigration as Israeli citizens at Ben Gurion Airport. My father was a generous and patient person with financial help for his family and to other charities, but never if they called during supper. They were then asked to send something in the mail, and he did often follow up with them. My father also was at times quietly challenging. Likely due to growing up in Boston, he had a disdain for referring to doctors as doctor and would call them by their first name, noting that they have a job, as does everyone else. Last night, with Rabbi Siegel and Rabbi Samuels, I explicitly asked him not to call me Dr. David Green, and he said explicitly that he would refuse and that I should tell the story. So here we are. And because of my dad, I always introduce myself as David to people. And yet my father respected authorities. He always sought doctors' advice, placed faith in their assessments, in his own health and in the health of my mother and of Helene's. My father was frustratingly clever. When asked by the nurse if he knew where he was after his recent heart valve surgery, he looked around the room and coyly responded, "Room 603A." He was always looking to make a smiling and playful banter, and when the nurse chuckled and asked, "And why are you here?" my father instantly, but always with a very slow delivery, responded, "2 reasons. I need a new heart valve, and the hospital needs money and quotas." My father, who tried to keep routine and predictability as best he could, seemed to often reinvent himself with both of his wives through their health and their sicknesses, and constantly tried to care for them until he no longer could. My father, who desperately wanted to maintain his independence and stay in Florida, willingly got on a plane to the Northeast with Yaakov and myself, ready and hopeful for the next chapter in his life. My father, who at the family meeting at the rehab hospital last week with Yaakov and myself, stated his desire to reunite with Helene in an assisted living facility. My father, who while we were young children, friends stated at times were very intimidated by him, maybe even scared, was also the same person who routinely was described by those same friends later in life as calm and mellow. And so my father was to me a complex man, one who changed and reinvented himself time and time again. He found comfort in routine, humor in reflection, and growing during times of despair. He was a kind and generous man. I miss my father and his passive approvals. I miss his idiosyncratic mannerisms that were infuriating as an adolescent. They became a source of comfort and routine for me. Secondly of all, he would say. Yaakov and I would always say, "Dad, it's either secondly or second of all, not secondly of all." Whatever was his playful routine. He was not an overly effusive man, but whenever I came to Florida or to visit him in the hospital, he proudly wore his Petach Tikva Pioneers hat, the one he got while coming to Israel to watch me ride the bench in the Israel Baseball League, who, unbeknownst to us until I went through his belongings, kept this in his wallet for over 25 years. This, for those of you who don't know, when Yaakov was a junior, rising senior in high school, ran a campaign to be the national education head of NCSY. And this was the Tfilat HaDerech card he gave out. And I found it in his wallet. My father was a quiet and reserved man, but had strong feelings and opinions of right and wrong. My father was an honest and decent man who worked hard for his family and yet was never consumed by the pursuit of money. And with this trip up north, Yaakov and I sat together with our dad. We set out our final adventure, adjustment, and adaptation. I got to sit with him for hours and talk with him about my aspirations for the future, about the work that I do, and even to engage in mindfulness exercises to help him keep that calm during his mind running in the night. He would sit there and say, "I understand, sounds good, yes," and the like. I will miss my father. I miss my dad, and his calmingly simple perspectives, his weekly routine of pre-Shabbos calls, and his poor memory. Each time he came to our home, we would serve him salmon, of course. He would say how much he enjoyed it, and then ask for the recipe for him and Helene, which we gave him multiple times. I remember the simple repetitiveness of a gunquit in the summers, birthday parties at Fairway or Fairway Bowling or at Wallex. And I will miss the dynamic nature of his quiet and unassuming perseverance. Last week, Yaakov, Shev, Amy, and I were having yet another family talk about next plans, about a transfer to Boston for more care, which we hoped for, but Sally did not have time to complete. We talked about how it would be hard for my dad because he was, quote, a creature of habit, we all said. But in the end, what we all agreed was that he was actually a creature of tremendous adaptation, always reinventing himself, but never losing himself in that change. He was proud of his sons, prouder of his daughters-in-law, and very proud of his grandchildren. When on a video call with my kids a few days before he died, he saw Amos wearing a Tatum jersey. He asked Amos, "What's on your jersey?" And Amos said, "The Celtics," to which my dad, in his characteristic bluntness and simplicity, said, "Good." He wasn't even a Celtics fan, meaning as much as they are, but my dad was mostly Sox and Bruins and later the Pats when things were good. I asked him why he wasn't such a Celtics fan, and he said, "I just don't get if you can watch the last 2 minutes of the game and get the same feeling, why do you have to watch the whole game?" As a child, I remember local trips were so stress-inducing that during the 1.5-hour ride to Maine, Yaakov and I were repeatedly told to, quote, "Be quiet, an important turn is coming up." Yet later, my dad ended up traveling with Helene to Venice, Israel, Alaska, and the Bahamas. And before that, with my mom to London, Israel, and the West Coast. I love and miss my dad. And I did not want to say goodbye. His cleverness never faded, and his sharp wit was present with him an hour before he died. I wanted and wished I could see how he was to reinvent himself again. I was not ready for this stage of life. I am not ready for this stage of life. And yet, I will try my best to learn from my dad, to not lose myself amidst the challenges and tragedy, and to find a way to reinvent myself in spite of the pain, and grow and adapt with his calming memory. And I know that it's a minhag, especially in Israel, to ask for mechila. And I just hope that my dad forgives us for all that we tried to do together and tried to accomplish, and that it ended too soon.
We now invite Emmy and then Adira to share words.
Grandpa taught me a lot when I was little. When I was around 9, I spent a week with him in Florida. It was a big milestone for me. My first time traveling on a plane alone and being away from home alone. That week, he introduced me to Toblerone. And much to my parents' dismay, he also let me watch Back to the Future for the first time. Back when we lived in Florida, we would always have Winn-Dixie pizza on Sundays. Grandpa always got mushroom and taught me the best way to eat pizza was folding it in half. I have a lot of funny and loving memories of him. His funky pajamas. I think we have a picture of him in his emoji set. His sardonic humor. Friday, Erev Shabbos calls with my dad. His love of mushrooms, and the funny songs he would sing. It's where my dad gets his habit of singing weird rhymes and he makes them up as he goes along. Grandpa's teeth brushing song, which most of you probably don't know, and the Beans, Beans, the Magical Fruit song, which you guys probably do know. I'll always think of him when I watch Back to the Future, when I see mushroom pizza or have Toblerone, in the weird songs my dad still sings, and in all the small ways he's still here with us. So I guess, thank you, Grandpa, for teaching us this important first as well. Thank you for being our grandpa. We love and miss you. And this is all a first for us as grandkids. Thank you.
I loved my grandpa very much, and I know I speak on behalf of my siblings, too, when I say we will miss him a lot. When we lived in Florida, we would often go to the zoo and trips together, and I especially remember when I was really little, my family and my cousins, the other Greens, met up in a park in New Jersey a few times, and my grandpa pushed me and my little siblings on the swings. We then went out to pizza across the street, and of course he ordered the mushroom pizza, his favorite. I really enjoyed and cherished his company. My grandpa was very careful about making sure to remember everyone's birthday with a card. He knew how to mark special occasions, and I always looked forward to getting that card every single year. I will miss those cards, but miss him even more. I would like to share something that's for my grandpa's memory, and I hope I can inspire at least some of you. I've learned that there's always something we can do to help ourselves grow. Every small detail that we can change for the better counts, especially in situations like this, with my grandpa's passing and with everything that's going on in Israel. We need to look back and reflect on ourselves. I heard somewhere that during the first few days of a person's passing, while a Jew's neshama is getting judged in Olam Haba, there are still ways we can help with the process to elevate his soul. Maybe it's learning in the name of someone, maybe it's just saying a bracha with that person in mind, or maybe it's taking something new upon ourselves that will not only help a neshama being presented to Hashem, but will also help us as a person and as a Jew, which I think my grandpa would really love and appreciate. So if it wouldn't be too much to ask, I would like everyone to try and take some new mitzvah upon themselves for the next couple of days and have my grandpa in mind, and who knows, maybe he'll stick with you. Thank you for listening, and Grandpa, I love you so much.
In this week's Parsha, Parshat Beshalach, Bnei Israel stand trapped between the Egyptian army and the Red Sea. B'tsetem mimitzrayim bein hamitzorim, between the narrow straits, fearing for their lives. And Moshe reassures them, Hashem yilachem lachem, va'atem tacharishun. Hashem will fight for you, and you shall be quiet. I thought of this pasuk because one of the things that we heard from all of our speakers, and that I remember about Yahweh, is his quiet, strong presence. quietly, intelligently supportive. And all this was not something he made a fuss over. He had a quiet dignity which everyone beheld on a consistent basis. Lee Munshine, who could not be here today, dear friend, I knew both your parents from the early days and retained images of their very happy courtship in early years. In particular, I recall the sight of the newly engaged couple walking together one Shabbos afternoon near the Brookline Reservoir. I was struck by the happiness they radiated. Your father beamed shyly, and your mother was absolutely radiant and beautiful. I believe that memories of happy moments have infinite significance and are a lamp to our parents' eternal souls. Dove Hazelcorn, dear, dear friend, who will see you later this week but couldn't be here today. He remembers your father's self-effacing type of humor and his one-line zingers that he would repeat again and again. A frequent visitor to your Shabbos table growing up, he remembers the oft-asked question, what are we having for lunch? What are we having for dinner? To which Ralph would unfailingly respond, poison. And what was your remember? Or tinfoil. He also remembers with awe how your father built the state-of-the-art ham radio communications tower and how this man of quiet dignity through dashes and dots would communicate with people all over the world. And then I remember the beginning, at least, of the Helene era, of their wedding, of finding love, companionship, and happiness again, as you described, of the quiet resilience and devotion that he showed both during the good times and more recently the times of challenge. And he really stands before us as this model of quiet, strong faith. Hashem yilachem lachem v'atem tacharishu. May his living model and his memory of blessing be a mora derech, a guide to all of us, that we too should find the strength, the presence to be there for the people we love, for our family, for our community, for Am Yisrael. And that in that way, we will make it through whatever straits we have to walk, and to find a way to also see with gratitude and with faith. Rabbi Siegel will now come forward to direct the end of the ceremony.
Thank you, Rabbi Samuels, for those very moving and meaningful words. The Kura interment will take place in Sham Memorial Park, where Linda is interred. It will take place immediately after we arrive, approximately 2 p.m. The Shiva will be observed at the home of Rabbi Yaakov on the Shiva Green at 40 Morton Road in the center. And this evening, there'll be a minyan at 4:55. There's a schedule of the Young and sign up that have been emailed out. Rabbi Dolhoff, principal of Maimonides Middle and High School, also a close friend, living family, will recite the Kamal Rachmi. I'd like to ask Rabbi Huff to come forward and ask everyone to please rise.
El Malei Rachamim, על כנפי השכינה. במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים. אס נשמת יצחק יחזקאל בן נוח, שהלך לעולמו ברור, שאנחנו מתפללים בעד הזכרת נשמתו. בגן עדן תהא מנוחתו, לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירנו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים. ויצרור בצרור החיים אס נשמתו, אדוני הוא נחלתו. וינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר אמן.
So we ask now, all bearers that please come forward.
כי מלאכיו יצא בלב לשמור